the Catholic Men's Podcast, helping you find good works of literature for the Catholic gentleman.
The Easter Offensive, which began on 30 March 1972, was an all-out attack by the North Vietnamese Army.
This is a recording of an oral history tape relating to combat action in the Republic of South Vietnam. Colonel Gerald Turley, USMC, is speaking.
To we in the Military Region 1, it truly caught us unprepared, perhaps mentally as well as materially unprepared to fight such a mass, multi-division reinforced by heavy artillery and armor, which we had never seen before, come at us in such a broad sweep. We then, from the Marine Advisory Group, have recorded our thoughts on tape. This tape was the first to arrive, and it was made by Major Regan Wright, Senior Advisor, Artillery Type.
During the period of 30 March 1972.
To someone who's not familiar with the history of the U.S. Marines, this tape is just a grovelly recording of some military debrief. But when I heard the voices of these American heroes who fought back the communist North Vietnamese Easter Offensive of 1972, it made my hair stand on end, and I sat bolt upright in my chair. The tape was recently remastered by the Marine Archives, and it's being broadcasted to the public for the first time in history right here on the Catholic Men's Podcast.
This is Lieutenant Colonel Turley. The tape was being made by Regan Wright up at the combat base where he was located just prior to his returning here to the Saigon, where I spliced this small administrative note in. And as he was making the tape, Captain Ripley came in, and John was asked to discuss what happened at the Dong Ha Bridge. He refused that in the sense of a good Marine. He felt his job was being the advisor, the silent partner, if you will, of a Marine battalion. On the urging of Regan Wright, and several others, and the current combat situations there, John was asked to tell it as it was. And so what now you'll hear is not an I did, but simply relating at this time, should anything happen, exactly what took place at Dong Ha. Now let's go back to John Ripley.
It's a battlefield recording of Colonel John W. Ripley, although then he was just Captain Ripley. This was a mere 3 hours after he had blown up the bridge at Dong Ha, which held back the North Vietnamese hordes. This was a momentous achievement, the strength for which was on par with Samson from the Old Testament. Although he must have been exhausted, having not slept for days, he still manages to give the report with precision. It's fascinating to hear, and I would recommend clicking on the link in the description of this podcast and following along with the transcript. Colonel Ripley's part of the recording begins on page 7. But I have to say that if you don't first know the story of the destruction of the bridge at Dong Ha, this recording will mean very little to you. So you can either listen to episode 52 of this podcast, which is about Colonel Ripley, and which I've linked in the description, or you can buy the book American Night, written by my good friend, Mr. Norman Fulkerson. And I think it's one of the key books that every young man should read. And now, without further ado, Colonel John W. Ripley.
Captain John W. Ripley, United States Marine Corps, and I am the senior advisor with the 3rd Marine Infantry Battalion. My part of this action took place in the defense of Dong Ha Village on the morning of 2nd April 1972. I will discuss that part of the action and explain my battalion's part throughout the action on the 2nd of April. On the morning of 2 April, the 3rd Marine Infantry Battalion was located at Dong Ha Combat Base when the enemy began an intensive artillery attack, firing over 500 rounds of 130mm artillery into the positions occupied by the battalion. The battalion then received orders to move into blocking positions along Route 9, QL9, west of Dong Ha, to be prepared to prevent any attempt by the enemy to bypass Dong Ha in his attack to the south. It was while we were moving into these positions that the battalion commander received a report that the enemy was attacking south along Route 1, QL1, in an estimated strength of a reinforced division. The enemy was reported moving rapidly in a mechanized column toward Dong Ha, consisting of a minimum of 20 tanks. At this point, perhaps an analysis should be made of the tactical and strategic importance held by the small village, Dong Ha, and the enemy's attack. At Dong Ha, the two major road networks of the entire province, indeed of the entire Corps, intersect. Route 9, leading west out of Dong Ha, offers the only trafficable access to western Vietnam and eventually into Laos and the entire northern half of the country. Route 1 runs generally north-south through Dong Ha and is intersected here by the Cam Lo River. The intersection of routes 1 and 9 are on the south bank of the river, perhaps just about 100 meters below the bridge. The importance of Route 1 doesn't need to be emphasized, as the main thrust of the enemy's attack was south along this route. Route 1 is a classic A-type, it is a Class A road with all bridges 60-plus tons test. This route would support any vehicle known to exist in the enemy force, and we realize that, of course. Two bridges across the Cam Lo River there. The first was a steel and timber heavy-duty bridge suitable for all classes of traffic, and the second bridge was a partially destroyed steel and concrete construction. Still suitable for light traffic, it was concrete and steel. It can be seen that the possession of Dong Ha, its road junction, and its bridges was a critical necessity to the success of the enemy attack. There were no friendly forces north of Dong Ha, having evacuated the northern fire bases under heavy enemy attack the previous day. Those were fire bases Alpha 2, 3, 4, Alpha 1, Charlie 1, and Charlie 2. There were no friendly forces on our flanks. Half of the battalion was in position west of Dong Ha with the tank force, but these were part of the overall Dong Ha defense. The only fire bases remaining west of Dong Ha and perhaps a bit south were Camp Carroll, which has already been reported as just prior to being overrun, and the Marine force at Mylock, which was under very heavy attack and both artillery and ground attack, and could have offered utterly no support. The nearest friendly forces were located south of Dong Ha at Quang Tri Combat Base, or I-2 Combat Base, and they had been instructed to withdraw south of Quang Tri River to form a defensive line there, while the 3rd Division headquarters, the 3rd Army Division headquarters, reestablished south of the river. They were in the process of moving south at the time. It became quite apparent that the 3rd Marine Infantry Battalion and the supporting tank battalion, 2nd and 20th Armored Tanks, stood alone at Dong Ha without the remotest possibility of reinforcement. The critical defense of Dong Ha would be made with the Marine Battalion and with a tank battalion against an enemy reinforced division supported by a tank regiment, 4 artillery regiments, which were identified then, a rocket regiment, and an anti-aircraft regiment that included SAM missiles. We were to later see these missiles that day knock down 2 A-1 aircraft, VNAF aircraft. This fact was quite apparent both to the commander and to all of us. Hearing of the rapidly advancing enemy armor force, the battalion commander ordered a rifle company into immediate defensive positions along the bridge. The time that he made this decision, of course, was about 0900, and the company arrived there at that time. His 2nd company was assigned to defend along the western edge of the village, just along Route 9, where the old railroad berm, or embankment, led to the south bank of the river and to the damaged remnants of a railroad bridge, which was a likely crossing point. The Bravo Command Group, consisting of 2 companies, remained with the tank force approximately 3 to 4 miles west of Dong Ha. So at that time, the battalion commander had only 2 companies in Dong Ha proper. He sent for this Bravo Command Group. He sent for them immediately. requesting that they return to Donghai. He then ensured the correct displacement of the defense force and then moved to a point just west of the village to brief the Bravo Command Group, which was at that moment arriving. During this brief, Donghai underwent an artillery attack of such an intensity that it absolutely defies description. For approximately 45 minutes, perhaps a bit longer, the enemy fired a devastating, murderous barrage of artillery into the village, concentrating the fires of probably 3 separate 130mm batteries. The effect was to isolate the village and prevent the arrival of the remaining 2 companies in tank force. We attempted to reach the companies in position twice, but the devastating fire made it out of the question. However, we did remain in contact with the units, and the battalion commander, through his encouragement and leadership, made them even more determined in their task to hold the bridge in the village. Finally, at approximately 10:15, an enemy tank appeared on the north bank of the river directly across the bridge and was immediately undertaken by rocketeers on the south bank and on the bridge itself, who had gone into a hasty defense. These rocketeers fired some between 5 to 8 rockets at the enemy tank, but because of the tank being in defilade on the northern end of the bridge and not having a clear shot, unfortunately the tank was missed. And nevertheless, he got the picture and moved backwards quite fast and into cover on the north bank of the river. And we didn't see this particular tank anymore. However, the defenders remained in position on the bridge and on the flanks of the bridge and began to consolidate their defense there. The importance of the bridge itself is quite obvious, and the battalion commander had requested demolitions and permission to destroy the bridge forthwith. The Marine commander of Brigade 258, Marine Brigade, had of course understood this and already assembled demolitions and had the demolitions moving at that time from Quang Tri up to Donghai, where we were to attempt destroying the bridge. During this period, the battalion commander had moved with the tank force around Donghai Combat Base and in a position on Route 9, on Route 1, just south of the Donghai Bridge, where he could support the bridge and with the tank force, and of course better control his battalion. Just after the rocketeers had fired on the one enemy tank, almost simultaneously, a platoon of M48A3 Arvin tanks arrived at the triangle, or the intersection of Route 9 and Route 1, just south of the bridge, and went into blocking positions there. They arrived only moments too late to undertake the enemy tank. However, they did get in position and formed a very effective block on the south bank, and no more enemy tanks attempted to cross the bridge at that point. With the situation as it was then, we were able to get 2 more companies in a position and to back up the forces already there, which were scant to say the least, and to support them, as I've already pointed out, with heavy armor, RM-48s, and the remaining 2 companies of the battalion. It is probably interesting to point out that this tank battalion was the only M48A3 battalion in the country at the time who had, one day prior to the beginning of this offensive, finished their a very large tank exercise and were at that point deploying back to their units, back to their bases, when they had received the word that the situation required them moving north to Donghai and 2 points in the northern part of the province. They had just finished, and this was the first time that this unit, heretofore unemployed in combat, it was the first time that they had received any combat mission whatsoever. So here they were and doing a beautiful job in support of the Marines. Infantry moved into position on the north bank of on the north bank of the Camelot River, and moved automatic weapons and of course all their integral weapons into position there. Although the tanks didn't expose themselves, they were partially exposed along the north shore of Route 1 as it angled back into back to the west a bit. Went into the positions on the north bank, opposite our positions on the south bank at the Camo Bridge. They also went into positions and occupied the remaining structure of the railroad bridge, some mile or so west of the highway bridge. In fact, they there affixed a very large flag to the structure of the bridge, and we took them under fire with tank rounds and didn't have any more problems from that area. However, we did not control the south bank of the river there. Our forces were just along Route 9 itself and not in control of the south bank. So that has significance later. Getting back to the bridge itself, up to this point, we were at a sort of a standoff. Although the enemy didn't try to get his tanks back across, we knew that it was only time before he massed them again with the appropriate forces, and perhaps under another artillery barrage, he would attempt to get his tanks over. It was imperative that the bridge be destroyed. Someone, although no one knew, had been tasked to destroy the bridge, and we had, in fact, had two reports that the bridge was first destroyed and then partially destroyed. It became obvious, both to myself and to an Army advisor who was with the tank force, that this was not the case. The bridge was, in fact, not destroyed. So I had been told personally on my command net by Lieutenant Colonel Turley, who was in control of the AO. I had been told personally to destroy the bridge, to ensure the bridge was destroyed, and if necessary to take tanks and attempt to shoot the struts out from beneath the bridge, which would have been next to impossible because of the very solid construction of the bridge. Therefore, I felt, because of his instructions, I felt that I should move forward to ensure that the bridge was destroyed. I did this, and at the same time, this Army advisor requested from his counterpart two tanks to assist us in getting forward to the bridge under the enemy fire, and to assist us while we were there. We moved forward on the tanks and arrived just at the triangle there where 9 intersects with 1. And I left the tanks there and then moved forward ourselves to the base of the bridge and moved quickly underneath the bridge to find quite a few demolitions there, which had been stowed up under the bridge itself, almost to the point where the structure of the bridge met the embankment. Just a quick look at the display of explosives and the method in which they were employed indicated that, however many they had there, they perhaps would have detonated the bridge, the explosives, but it was very clear that they probably would not have destroyed the bridge. In fact, they may have dropped the span, but only enough so that it would have contacted the embankment, and the tank still could have come across the bridge and down the remaining span onto the embankment and still gotten ashore, onto the south shore. There was a chain link anchor fence there protecting the access to the other side of the bridge, obviously put there to prevent any sappers from getting under the bridge. And in order to get the explosives properly emplaced, I had to reach up to the I-beams, to the stringers running longitudinally under the bridge. I had to pull myself up onto this stringer and over this chain link fence, and then hand walk, hanging under the bridge. I had to walk out to a point over the river where I could properly put these explosives, where they would do the job. I got out there and swung myself up under the beams itself. I had a little difficulty because in my haste I forgot to take my webbing off, and it was pulling me down somewhat. But I finally did get my heel hooked and got up into the I-beams and into those stringers. And then the major began to push, that is, the other advisor began to push explosives out to me, and I placed them between these beams, between the stringers. I think there were 6 very large stringers under the bridge. Once I had them in place, I blocked my access to the rear of the bridge off, so I had to again lower myself and up into the next one, and then go back and get more more explosives. I think we had probably 500 pounds, perhaps more, of combination C4 and TNT. The TNT was in boxes weighing probably 75 pounds, something like this. It made it rather difficult to get them out into those I-beams because the weight of the box, and it was rather cumbersome. But the explosives were emplaced, and they were emplaced looking down on the bridge diagonally. They were emplaced in such a manner that beginning from the eastern stringer on the bridge, they moved in a diagonal line back to the western stringer, which is the proper way to blow a bridge. If they had been placed, as we found them, directly across under the bridge, then they would not have done the job at all. Simply would have cut the bridge, and the remaining structure would have fallen onto the south bank. And as I pointed out, quite likely the tanks still could have crossed and gotten onto the bank and into Don Ha. It took about an hour to properly get these explosives in place. It was unnecessary to go back out with time fuse and refuse all of the explosives. And having done this, we located some electric caps which were much more efficient. So I went back out and replaced I supplemented the time fuse with electric caps, and then ran these back and tied them off onto electric wire there. Put the explosives in position on that bridge. We then had to take some more explosives onto the small, lightly trafficked bridge alongside, and place that so that it could be destroyed also. Well, that was done, and we moved back to destroy the bridge. We got a Jeep with a battery, exposed the battery, and attempted to, we had our wires for both bridges leading back to in the vicinity of the Jeep. And then we attempted to destroy the bridge. But for some reason, the doggone thing wouldn't work. It appeared that there was a break in the wire. Well, considering this, before leaving the bridge itself, I had set 2 time fuses on the outboard stringers. With a quick estimate of how long it would take, it would have taken longer than 45 minutes, so I felt that was a safe enough time to make sure everybody was out of the area. So I went ahead and lit these 2 time fuses and then backed off. Just after we attempted the destruction by the electric means, word came down via the division channel not to destroy the bridge. Of course, we were in a very hazardous situation. The enemy, completely through this whole affair, was directing fire onto the south bank and onto our efforts at placing the explosives and getting the bridge destroyed. The explosives were, of course, in position, and of course the time and electric caps were in place in the explosives. And the greatest danger, of course, was that the electric caps, highly unstable, were in position in all the explosives, and almost anything could detonate them. So that having been given the order not to destroy the bridge, it would have been necessary right away to get the electric caps out. I requested permission to do so, and I was told to stay away from the bridge and to just wait for further instructions. We moved back, and my counterpart, the battalion commander, was told by his senior officer, the brigade commander, the Marine brigade commander, to destroy the bridge. That, of course, countered our last word. We went forward to destroy it at this time, and were met by a newly appointed ground commander who hastily organized a brigade commander in control of the whole area, who had just arrived. He said that he had been given orders by the division commander not to destroy the bridge. I informed him that I had been given instructions twice from 2 different commanders to destroy the bridge, and that I intended to do so, and that it would be burdened if we all moved back from the bridge, as the bridge and its present stance was ready to go up at any minute, particularly with those electric caps in place. We then moved back from the bridge, and he was awaiting instructions from his division commander when almost simultaneously there arrived a flight of Vietnamese Air Force A-1s to conduct a bombing mission on the north side of the river. And while these A-1s were bombing, the bridge detonated and was, of course, destroyed. It dropped the entire span from the south bank all the way to the first stanchion and completely devastated the bridge, made it totally unusable for any sort of traffic. The bridge alongside detonated at the same time and destroyed it at the same time, of course. Now that the bridge was destroyed, we're in a much better position to defend Dong Ha. The Tank Force Commander deployed troops with each of the companies, tank troops, and we went into positions, into defensive positions all around the city. We had no reinforcements as yet. The enemy was continuing its artillery attack and also heavy small arms and direct fire weapons from the north bank. He had not as yet attempted any infiltration. The Vietnamese Air Force A-1s, which were conducting bombing missions immediately on the north bank of the river, just on the other side, and certainly within our full view, were receiving very heavy ground fire and apparently anti-aircraft fire, probably 37 millimeter guns. It was quite obvious anti-aircraft fire and not just small arms fire. Suddenly, while we were standing on a tank and observing, a missile left the deck and in very short order impacted in one of the A-1s, turning it into a ball of fire immediately. And miraculously, the pilot managed to get out and floated very close to the bridge and unfortunately onto the north bank. We requested permission to pick him up and we were denied. We were not to cross the river and attempt any rescue. The situation probably stabilized at this point, and for the rest of the day it was a defense from both sides. We returned fire to the north bank of the river, and the enemy did not attempt to cross the river during the daylight hours. We continued to receive indirect fire, primarily artillery, and quite a bit of small arms along the river itself. That evening, the enemy did attempt to cross the river and managed to get a number of his forces across. However, they were intercepted right at the bridge and along the LST ramp to the right of the bridge, some couple of hundred meters. They attempted to get through Dong Ha Village, which is to the left of the bridge, which is to the left of the bridge, and they were stopped there. No enemy got past Route 9, nor did they get south of the village itself. They were all stopped there by the Marines in position and by the tank fire. The village was held that evening, and throughout the evening we had heavy resistance in the village, heavy incoming. We also had reports of tanks attempting to move. That is, we had visual sightings of tanks moving west along a secondary road leading from Route 1 toward the village of Cam-Lo. We saw some 20 tanks moving at night along that road. Going back to that day, the air credited themselves with 4 tank kills on the road itself. They reported to us they had killed 4 tanks there. We had managed to engage one tank on Route 1 north of the bridge from a position west of Dong Ha where Route 1 was visible. We could actually see Route 1 and we could see the flanks of the tank, and the tankers undertook it and destroyed a tank there. They feel that they probably damaged a second tank, but they were not sure. However, air reported to us the second day that there were 7 tanks destroyed just north of the bridge. The defense of Dong Ha was continuous throughout the day and the evening, and during the evening we received reports of more tanks proceeding toward, not necessarily toward Dong Ha, but along Route 9 in the vicinity of Vandergrift Valley. We had reports of tanks moving through the valley. We also had reports of tanks attempting to get to Cam-Lo to cross the remaining bridge there. We used very heavy air and naval gunfire assets to interdict them, plus the artillery which was established at the time. And the next day, things stabilized. We got more artillery batteries in place, gained much more support, and employ that as necessary. We never did receive a serious tank threat from the west during those first 2 or 3 days, but the enemy did manage to get a number of infantry forces across at Kenlow, and on 2 occasions attacked in heavy force the perimeter which we had established around the Donha base. On one particular evening, I think it was the 5th, they attacked our Bravo command group, which had a company of Marines and a company of tanks, and estimated battalion strength, where they were beaten back during the evening with the assistance of a spooky gunship and a flare ship and very heavy artillery support. The next morning we found 72 dead and an undetermined number of weapons. Throughout this week, for the period of 1 week, the 3rd Marine Infantry Battalion, Vietnamese, and the tank battalion, the supporting tank battalion, by themselves, those 2 battalions, defended Dong Ha without losing a square inch or as much as a grain of sand. The enemy infiltrated into the southern bank of the river and in the vicinity of the railroad bridge, and the Marines pushed them back out of that area and back across the river, accumulating some 150 to 200 confirmed kills. The enemy also managed to get into position south of Route 9 at one point, along the back road exit of Dong Ha Combat Base. They were surrounded there. They were surrounded, and we killed 33 enemy there, killed a company XO, captured 4 radios, and lost only 3 Marines killed in that action. We lost 2 tanks damaged, but still mobile, and no other tanks killed. No tanks destroyed, only 2 tanks damaged throughout this defense. The Marine Battalion was relieved of the defense of Dong Ha and moved into reaction supporting roles in the vicinity of Dong Ha Combat Base when an Army Battalion was moved forward. However, the Army Battalion had a good bit of difficulty in holding Dong Ha itself and the adjoining defenses that we had established. It was necessary 2 days later to again put the Marines back into the defense and try to clear the area. This was not successfully completed when only 1 day later, on Saturday, the last day of our week-long defense, we were relieved of the defense of Dong Ha by a Ranger group consisting of 300-man Ranger battalions, and we moved back into the defense of Quantry Combat Base, where we now are.
On 23 April, Colonel Joshua Dorsey III, who was at that time the senior Marine advisor to the Vietnamese Marine Corps here in country, felt that this tape was of such immediate interest that it should be mailed to the Commandant of the Marine Corps. On 26 April 1972, the tape was then mailed to the Chief of Staff, the Commandant of Headquarters, Marine Corps.